Welcome back to the channel. My name is Cairo. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Today I wanted to talk about my most underrated team and the team that I believe will probably make the biggest jump or at least be extremely competitive, a lot more than what people are expecting, and that is the Portland Trail Blazers. Last season, the Portland Trail Blazers finished the 12th seed and finishing about 36 wins on the season and about 3 to 4 games below the 10th seed. And when I look at their overall roster, I see a lot of potential in a team that can be extremely competitive. Last season, one of the biggest jumps that we saw was the Detroit Pistons. The season before that, they had one of the worst losing records in the entire NBA and overall in history. And they made that jump. They changed a lot of coaching decisions. The culture itself was changed, and then just how player rotations function. You had an not all star. You had a very good season from Malik Beasley. You provided a lot of shooting for Cade Cunningham. Overall spacing really fixed the issue for the Detroit Pistons. And then the season before, 2 seasons ago, you had the Utah Jazz not making the playoffs, but essentially making a bigger leap than what people expected and overall being competing. And that was from, I believe, Laurie Marketing's All Star season. But what I'm trying to say is that every year there's a team that is either more competitive than what people expect, and I'm predicting that to be the Portland Trailblazers. Now, why? When we look at the Portland Trailblazers roster, I see a lot of veteran experience across. I see a lot of guys that are also very young that can learn, and I expect a lot of improvement and development from the core guys. Right, Denny Avdia in the last maybe 15 games of the season, he averaged over 23 points per game. He was an absolute elite offensive hub while being a great defensive anchor. He provided a lot of showcase. You know, providing that he could be an all-star level type of player, right? He could be that MIP next season, right? And I think right now he currently leads. Him and Andrew Nimhart currently lead for the most improved player discussions, right? I think plus 500 or something like that. But he finished the season averaging basically about 17 points per game. Pretty sure like 6 to 8 rebounds, and then about 3 assists on pretty good efficiency, right? I think, with his size and his ability to get down the rim, his name is Turbo for a reason. He showed great athleticism and just overall being a great, versatile player. And, I think that's, a perfect player to lead a team. And I expect them to make that bigger jump, right? And I'm just going to go through the list of the Portland Trailblazers because I really do think with better development, especially when you add a Damian Lillard, which I will get to, it improves the function and the culture of the team, which is essentially what you see in a lot of teams that make that jump that people aren't really expecting, right? Scoot Henderson. I'm high on Scoot Henderson. I believe he has that explosiveness to ability to get to the rim. I kind of made that mistake a few years ago predicting that, I wanted Charlotte to take Scoot over Brandon Miller, but clearly Brandon Miller, as of right now, is the better player and has more All Star potential. But I really do think Scoot, when you have a shorter point guard that isn't really the best shooter, they don't tend to do well. Well, in general, point guards first entering the NBA generally don't do well, right? You see it with Darius Garland. Just guys entering the NBA as true point guards take about 2 to 3 seasons before they really get acclimated, right? And I think it really sucks to see because for the past 2 seasons, watching the Portland Trailblazers, I feel as though Chauncey Billups has really hindered Scoot's development a little bit. And that's not to get away from Scoot's ability, right? Because he has struggled a lot to finish around the rim and just get a lot of better open looks. But there have been stretches over the last 2 seasons where he has played really well and then he'll get benched or he won't see consistent amount of minutes, and I do think that could hinder a young player's development and growth. I think regardless of Drew Holiday being on this team, he and Shaden Sharp should have the ability to start. We need to see those core guys. This is not about a yes, the I'm making the argument that they're making that jump, but I really want to see Scoot Henderson and a bigger jump from Shaden Sharp, who has done a lot better, Shaden Sharp. But Scoot Henderson's ability to be that Russell Westbrook type of player is really important, and you want to unlock that. Him coming off the bench and having like a Drew Holiday start, it's not going to work out. You need to see what you can get from him because even if he plays like bad, he's still going to have some type of trade value, right? You might not get a lot out of it if he ends up being a bust, but you need to see who he is as a player, and you can't have that with him coming off the bench. So I fully expect him to be getting reps and to be in that starting point guard position, which he was. I'm pretty sure his rookie season, which obviously he didn't do well. But I fully expect a bigger jump. But I will be completely honest, even if he were to start and he played a lot better, I don't think, unless he's averaging upwards of 20 plus points per game on 5, 6 assists a night, I realistically think when Damian Lillard comes back, he's going to start, right? I don't expect Scoot Henderson to make a huge leap, right? And if he does, great. But I realistically don't see that, especially in 1 year, knowing that he was coming off the bench most of the season, right? And then in this offseason, you also, I will just mention it right here, you trade for Damian Lillard, right? You get him on the Bucks. Well, you sign Damian Lillard, and clearly he's coming back home. This is, a good get, a veteran piece, a guy that's the culture of Portland. He's been there for basically a decade now, and he really does hope, the culture of the young guys, right? You have a Shaden Sharp, you have a Hanson Yang, you have a lot of guys on this team that are still very young, that are under 25 years old. I'm looking at their roster right now and learning from a player like Damian Lillard, who hasn't had the best teams around him, but veteran experience is always important, right? And there's not much to say about Damian Lillard because we already know who he is, but I think he's the perfect developmental piece and that veteran presence around a Scoot Henderson. Although their games are a little bit different, Scoot has a perfect opportunity to learn from both Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard, a defensive menace and an offensive hub, which is perfect. And I do think, Scoot Henderson has to utilize this year to the most of his advantage because this is definitely going to be a gap year for him, and he needs to really do his best out there and perform like, the number 3 overall pick, right? You also you trade Anthony Simons over the offseason, and then you get Drew Holiday in return. Originally, I thought Drew Holiday was going to get waived and, bought out, or somebody else signed him because he seemed like he was really aggravated by the fact that he was in Portland. But he seemed to be accustomed to it now, and I still think, although Drew Holiday was pretty poor last season, I would say that he's still a very important player in terms of, like I said, the culture, the impact on what you have on young guys. I'm telling you right now, veteran pieces are very important in winning culture. Maybe not now, but definitely in the future, right? And what you learn, the long term experience, right? I think him being there definitely helps. And he's not gonna have as big of expectation just because I'm assuming you're in Portland compared to Boston. Boston had championship expectations, and him not playing well has a spotlight on his head. But in Portland, he does it now, so he can kind of take a step back, which I fully expect. Right? You have Shaden Sharp, who averaged almost upwards of 20 points per game last season. He still has a very, in my opinion, like similar game to what he had in his rookie season. A lot of mid-range shots, athletic. Feats here and there, but he's still a guy that is very good developmentally, and he has shown the ability to grow every year here and there. I just want to see a little bit more in terms of the diversification of his game, where he gets his shots. But that's not really much to complain about. I fully expect the lineup to be Scoot Henderson, Shaden Sharp, in my opinion, Denny Avdia, Tamani Kamara, and Donovan Clean. You should play the guys out there that have proven themselves and the guys that you have to see what they're capable of, because I do not want Drew Holiday to start. This should be the year of Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp proving even more that they are the right guys that they drafted, right? But not even that, right? When I say at the end of the day, this video is about the jump I expect the Portland Trailblazers to make. At the end of the day, even if those guys don't develop, I look at the rest of the roster, and I've made an emphasis so much on this video about the importance of veterans. You still have Jeremy Grant on the books, and he's coming off the bench. He might be the most paid player coming off the bench. He's making around $32 million a year, and he's still a valuable piece in terms of, he's a locker room guy. He's very important, and, he can still get you 13 to 15 points per game off the bench very efficiently, too. An okay defender, I would say, but that's still a great guy to have coming off your bench. Do I expect him to be traded this season? It's possible. I do think his contract is going to be a little bit hard to trade, especially because you never want to trade for a guy making that much money, and he just came off the bench last season, right? But I still think he's great. I already mentioned Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard. I still like the additions of, I'm pretty sure they signed Blake Wesley. I think he's an underrated point guard, but overall, Tamani Kamara, great. I'm so high in Tamani Kamara, out of Dayton. And he's just overall been, a defensive player of the year type of player, right? And the fact that he could shoot makes it great because you have a guy like Scoot Henderson and Denny Avdia, who are both like they love that playmaking aspect of the game, and then you have a stretch four that can also play elite defense. It's perfect. Those are the guys that get paid in the NBA, and I'm pretty sure the Portland Trailblazers already made it obvious that he's worth about 2 first round picks to them, right? You drafted Yang Hansen, in my opinion, a little bit of a reach, and I still think he's probably going to spend most of his time in the G League because I do think the game, watching Summer League, the game was a little bit too fast for him, but he still had growth and signs of skill, so that's good. Um, you know, I do think Robert Williams, if healthy, is probably one of the best backup centers in the NBA. He's not the tallest, but running that safety line set up a few years ago with the Boston Celtics really unlocked a lot of his skills. And I do think he's a great backup option to Donovan Clingan, who Donovan he's almost 300 pounds, but he still provides a lot in terms of the defensive side of the ball and then being a great rebounder as well. So I think Portland has a great group of guys who mesh well with defensive capabilities, being an offensive hub, playmaking, just overall a different mixture of group of guys, of both veteran and young guys, right? I think this is an exciting team. You also have Matisse Thybulle. I forgot, they picked up his player option, but he didn't play a lot last season. He got injured, but in the games that he did play, he looked pretty good. You might be able to expect a trade for Jeremy Grant, Matisse Thybulle, Robert Williams at some point in the future. Maybe it's possible, but I think they have a group of guys that are really well together, that have a lot of different assets and versatility, and I think that's perfect for a team that's moving up. Remember, they won 36 games last season, and they were upwards about 3 to 4 games from the 10th seed. I'm not saying they make the playoffs. No, I'm not saying that they're the 8th seed, because I'm pretty sure the 8th seed won almost like 45 games, which is a lot, 45 to 48 games. I think Portland can be one of those dangerous teams that people don't expect to be as good, and they are. I think Portland's one of those teams where they are very fun and people never expect it. I think a lot of this is primed on the development of Scoot Henderson and Shaden Sharp, right? But if Scoot Henderson doesn't really develop, I could still see a very good season from Denny Avdia, and then an even better season from Tamani Kamara, right? So it's just that overall asset and versatility of their entire team paired along with the veteran experience, right? I think this is perfect. I think Portland entered themselves into contention for the play-in and potentially winning a few more games this season. I think they're probably the most underrated team, and I expect a bigger jump and leap this season from the Portland Trailblazers. Thank you. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. My name is Cairo.